So Robert, thank you very much for taking the time on a Sunday to talk about metals and mining industry. Look, first, very obvious questions at the moment. We're talking a lot about the energy transition, a lot of concern about how empty the project pipeline is, yet you're bringing on Kamoa-Kakula at the moment. So how do you approach exploration and development? What do you do different than others?
It's a very long-term business. You just mentioned two projects that were 20 years or more in development. So Kamoa-Kakula is an overnight success after 27 years of hard work. So if you're going to be working that long on a project, each mining project is really about the same amount of work. A little baby one that only has 5 or 10 years of life is not really that different than a really great project with 100 years of life. So it's very important to concentrate on the Tier 1 assets that can live through several life cycles. That way 20 years of effort is worth it because the mine will have a life of a century. So we try to focus on best-in-class deposits, ones that will be around for our children and our grandchildren and perhaps our grandchildren's children at the bottom of the world cost curve. And we're constantly on the look for those types of deposits.
Do you see anything out there right now that is of interest to you, rivaling, say, Kamoa-Kakula?
In mineral exploration, you'll only find an Easter egg by going somewhere new, going to a terrain that is relatively unexplored and looking at it with the basis of a lot of history to place what you see in context. And so we're definitely on the path to finding more Tier 1 deposits. Some examples of areas that are greatly underexplored would be the Arabian Shield and the United States of America itself. America has an enormous geological endowment, and obviously Saudi Arabia has an enormous geologic endowment, and yet they're relatively unexplored.
It sounds as if you would only develop world-class assets. You wouldn't go down further the value chain to make sure that we have enough metals available for the energy transition.
It's only the Tier 1 assets that make a difference to the supply chain and the dilemma that the world finds itself in. You start talking about an energy transition, you're talking about requirements for enormous amounts of energy. The city we're in here, London, everything you see here was all built on the back of Saudi oil. Had the Ghawar field and Saudi development not have happened in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, the modern cities in today's world would not have been built. So we always face the problem that people don't really understand where things come from. They don't understand the inherent global warming gas that was generated in building the modern world that we live in. So on a going forward basis, if you want to make an impact and change the world in any way, we need the really super giant low-cost deposits. Without that, it's just a waste of time, because the task is so large to engage in an energy transformation. The short-lived mines, they won't even begin to solve the problem. It's bad enough with the giant mines. They're still relatively small compared to the hydrocarbon industry. Historically, oil and gas spills more money than the whole mining industry makes. Mining is tiny, tiny, tiny compared to oil and gas. And so when you start, you want to close all those coal mines in Germany? Mrs. Merkel, she didn't make much progress on that, did she? And so we're just beginning to realize how difficult this energy transition is actually going to be and how critically important Saudi Arabia sits in the energy transformation to maintain stability for the world economy, because you can't get into an energy transition in a world riven by war, riven by economic collapse. That's not a background in which you can stop generating global warming gas. So Saudi Arabia sits in a position to maintain energy security as Russian production is now declining for obvious reasons.
You've mentioned Saudi Arabia a fair bit already, and I realized also that you were speaking actually at an event in Saudi Arabia earlier this year. The government there seems to be putting a lot of effort into boosting the mining industry. Is that a region or a country where you see a lot of potential for metals and mining companies going forward?
We probably peaked in the integration of the world economy around 2008. Toyota had come up with just-in-time manufacturing. You would just get a screw for the dashboard of that Toyota car just in time. And since 2008, we're gradually seeing the integrated world economy balkanize and fall apart. So every country that can afford to do it wants to secure their supply chain. So Saudi Arabia is looking at what it imports in metals to maintain their economy, and they've announced publicly that they'd like to mine half or more of what they need for copper or zinc or other critical metals domestically. And that's exactly what the Americans are saying, for example. So we're seeing a transition from a just-in-time economy to a just-in-case global economy, where each nation state is worried about their national security and realizing that nothing grows on trees, really, except for avocados and a few almonds and grapes. Generally speaking, every nation is concerned now with developing their own domestic raw material supply chain. Saudi Arabia has enormous advantages. It has obviously cheap energy and excellent infrastructure, and the rocks are visible to the naked eye in the Arabian Shield. They're not covered with trees, for example. So as an explorationist, when you go to the Brazilian jungle, you don't really want to disturb the jungle and all the flora and fauna there. You'd rather go to a desert environment. If you think about Nevada or Chile, places where Australia and the outback, it's easier to see the rocks where there's no trees. So dry, unexplored rocky terrains with excellent infrastructure and inexpensive energy are places where you might be able to find something truly great. So the Arabian Shield and its twin on the other side of the Red Sea in Sudan and Egypt is one of the types of terrains we would go to and look at to explore for undeveloped wealth. And without a shadow of a doubt, Saudi Arabia has great mineral potential. Thousands of years before the life of the Prophet, say almost 4,000 years ago, people were mining gold in Saudi Arabia at a place called Ma'ad al-Dahab, meaning the cradle of gold in Arabic. Thousands and thousands of years, like the time of the pyramids, they were mining gold. So clearly there's great mineral potential there and in other unexplored terrains in the world.
In terms of mineral potential, where do you see the opportunities in that part of the world? Where do you start in finding those opportunities?
We've been to over 130 countries. We actually worked in 61. So we have people that live and breathe the geology and understand how the earth was formed and are really looking at these rocks. And then the geologic terrains have other parameters associated with them as to whether it's possible to go there and do some work. For example, Iran. Iran also has very good geology. Iran has a huge endowment of oil, copper, zinc, gold, for example. The problem is that it's difficult for us to go to Iran for obvious reasons. So there's still political factors that come with the geology. So we would say Saudi Arabia ranks very high with inexpensive energy, a stable, trustworthy government, a government that wants to improve their national security by welcoming mining. So that would rank very good on a multiplicity of indicia that you might not find in other places that have mineral potential. It's not enough to have mineral potential. Capital flees at the first sign of trouble. Money is a coward. As soon as something goes wrong, it runs away. So we're looking for environments that are stable and have a cultural affinity for developing God's gift to humanity, these minerals. All of modern life, all of human welfare depends on mining.
If we change geographical focus as well and look, for instance, at the US, right? In the US, You have an administration now in place that is trying hard to push domestic mining. The question really is, when you're looking at kind of the obstacles that the mining industry faces, how much of an issue do you think permitting, getting projects off the ground, how much of an issue, or ESG as well, how much of an issue that has become to developing sites?
Well, the current administration has gone from being the enemy of oil and gas exploration and development, killing pipelines and making it harder to produce hydrocarbon domestically, to paradoxically begging other people to produce more oil and gas in other parts of the world, or dumping fruitlessly a national strategic stockpile on the market in a fruitless attempt to prevent the price from going up, because once you sell your stockpile, you're naked to the wind. So that stockpile was sold at $80 and we're sitting here today at $120. Didn't really do much. So I think we're getting a very rapid education in the real world that it's not easy to make an energy transition for planet Earth. And we don't have enough sort of respect for what humanity achieved with all this hydrocarbon that was developed and how the modern world was built. And this is just a function of people being uneducated. They really don't understand this astral, cosmic thought of the supply chain. And you know, I've constantly told my friends, no, Alice, a ham sandwich does not come from a refrigerator. And so we're so far divorced in the modern world, especially in cities. People that live in cities they're used to turning the lights on. You turn on a switch, the lights come on. They never think that when you turn on the lights, somewhere a generator has to kick in and make that electrical energy and send it to you so that light can come on. And so a lot of people think a Google search is somehow green, or people think perhaps the internet is green, or they think their handphone is green, or they think that Netflix is green. None of it is green at all. Every time you do a Google search, you're using a huge amount of electrical energy. It's just that it's paid for by advertising. So it looks like it's free to you, but you're paying for it in advertising, and everything you buy had to be advertised. So there's a hidden cost in that object to pay for the energy in that Google search. So everything we're doing is consuming more and more electrical energy. The average person has all kinds of electronic devices, and we're creating mountains of electronic waste and garbage. So if we have 8 billion people in the world, all of whom drawing down broadband, internet, wireless, the cloud, this is insanely energy consumptive. And all these young kids buying Bitcoin, that's not green. That's the opposite of green. To squeeze out that last marginal, little bit of crypto, chewing up just huge amounts of energy. Ethereum has said they're going to do something about it, but they failed repeatedly to solve that problem. So we need this very sober conversation about how we make a better world for our kids and what's actually required to get there from here. And so the most important transitional fuel is LNG, natural gas. It's halfway there. It's better than burning coal. It's stable, and it gives you, background power. And without LNG, this winter, your friends, you said you just came from Germany, they'll freeze in the dark without LNG. So LNG is just a step in the transition. If you want to get to solar and wind, well, there's problems with all of these technologies. The ultimate solution is probably geothermal or nuclear, something that doesn't generate global warming gas and runs 24 hours a day, because grid scale storage is problematic, and moving these electrons all over the world is problematic. And I don't really know of anybody that seriously wants to go back to the Stone Ages. Most people have been to a hospital or a dentist and appreciated it. So the only path forward is to electrify the world economy reduce the burning of fuels that generate global warming effect, because we can't afford to make a mistake on this matter. The stakes are so high, it just doesn't make any sense not to try to think about how to solve this problem. It's only in recent years that we're starting to get intelligent people in the financial system starting to understand a little bit about the supply chain and how difficult it is to find these critical raw materials if you don't want to do things the way we've always been doing them. That's why it's worth talking about this, because it's important that people really understand that everything comes from somewhere. Like right now we have a baby food shortage. Big panic in the United States. No baby food. Or sriracha. Today, all the Japanese restaurants, they need sriracha sauce for their spicy tuna rolls. There's no sriracha sauce. Or Ford couldn't build pickup trucks. They couldn't get the semiconductor chips. What's going on here? And what's going on here is that there are supply chain constraints everywhere. And the supply chain constraints are not alleviated by the Federal Reserve Board or the European Central Bank raising interest rates. Yes, you can crush demand. You can create a severe recession. But we still want to change the way we generate electricity. We still want to reduce global warming gas. And so we need a more sober and sophisticated understanding of the real supply chain, the real word or the real meaning of supply chain. We have to really examine the supply chain. We have to find a better and more sustainable way of doing things. And now all of this is compounded by the demand of national defense and the prospect of hoarding. I think we're beginning the era of hoarding. For example, the Thais are big rice exporters. And they start to think, well, maybe we won't export so much of our rice, or maybe we'll trade some rice for oil. This kind of thinking is now creeping. And this is nothing you've experienced in your lifetime, and neither have I, but we're in a Vujade phenomenon, which is the overwhelming feeling none of this has ever happened before. And I don't think the Federal Reserve Board has any understanding of the supply chain whatsoever. You remember the gentleman running the Federal Reserve Board said this inflation is transitory. And he said that with a straight face, looking in a camera. Well, it's obvious he doesn't understand the supply chain because oil is $122 a barrel today. And so that's very scary because they're trained economists. They're trained to think a certain way, but they're divorced from the real world. The real world is that our integrated world economy is stressed. For whatever reason, after many decades of integrating the world economy, where everything you found at Walmart said made in China, suddenly, you have to make all that stuff in the United States. You can't even get anybody to flip hamburgers in the United States, let alone to make all that stuff at Walmart. And so obviously the cost is not going to be measured in 8% inflation. If everything has to be made domestically in every country, it's insanely inflationary. If the Japanese want their own supply chain and they don't trust the Koreans, and the Koreans want their own supply chain and they don't trust the Chinese want their own supply chain, they don't trust the Indians want their own supply chain, we've got trouble coming. And it can't be resolved by raising rates 5 or 10%. That will create economic dislocation. It could engender a severe recession, but it won't solve the problem. Human beings need to understand each other and avoid war. And historically, when people trade and have commerce, it's good for world peace. As soon as that trade starts to break down, you start to worry about national defense and war. As soon as it's us versus them, the other. And so a lot of this scramble for these critical raw materials like energy or metals has now taken on a national security flavor. And that starts to become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
if I can drill down a little bit more on that, take Repower EU, right? The energy transition and energy independence program in the US. There's a lot of focus on what Europe would like to achieve, for instance, in installation of solar and wind. And you kind of alluded to it already, but it doesn't seem as if there is enough of an understanding of what is actually required to make all of that happen in terms of metal requirements. Same thing with the COP summit, right? Discussion was it a success or failure? And I think it was neither really, because it missed the important point of where the stuff actually comes from. So the question really is, what do you think needs to happen for the global community to appreciate that, say, metals and mining is part of the solution going forward, and that we actually need more metals and mining investment, capex, to come through to make sure that we don't run into serious constraints?
There's very, very broad span on lack of understanding that solar can be part of the equation, but there's such low energy density in solar, you'll have to cover huge amounts of every country in solar panels to replace the energy intensity you get in, say, nuclear power or burning hydrocarbon. And then the sun doesn't shine all the time. So you need an energy storage solution. And a lot of people don't want these big windmills in their backyard because they go whoop, whoop, whoop. You hear that sound. And they're just chewing up a lot of bird life. And so they're not that good either. And then you've got to recycle those blades. Those windmills, maybe they have a 15 or 20-year life. You got to build them all over again. None of these solutions are easy, and so they're sort of assumed to work, and nobody really thinks about the scale. When you really want to stop burning that coal, and you really want to stop burning that hydrocarbon, you basically have to cover all of Saudi Arabia with solar panels. All of Europe, 80% of the land with solar panels. And still you only get 6 hours of electricity. And so, you know, all those windmills that the Danes built, this year, the wind just stopped blowing. Crisis. So, on top of that, the electrical grid, the fundamental infrastructure to absorb that alternative energy is not built to absorb solar and wind. It can't do it. The grid's 100 years old. So the whole idea of the grid is like completely beyond popular imagination. That people are walking around with no understanding whatsoever of the electrical grid. What is the grid? There is zero energy storage in the grid. The American electrical grid would be like balancing a pencil vertically in your palm. The pencil's standing up. It's just balancing load. And it wants to collapse at any given moment. It's a 100-year-old, 120-year-old machine that just can't absorb huge amounts of alternative energy. If all of us bought a Tesla and plugged it in at 5 p.m., in America, we just fry the grid. So replacing the grid with a smart grid that can absorb alternative energy, tens of trillions of dollars involved. And what is the grid made out of? Spaghetti? What do you think the grid's made out of? And where do the metals come from for that grid? That's just the backbone. And then there's the actual generation of those electrons and how they're used. And so you have to think about the amount of energy expended over, say, a century. Like, how long does this infrastructure last? If you have to go out and replace every windmill in the North Sea after 15 or 20 years, what's that going to cost? Can you recycle those blades? No, you can't. They're burying them. And so it's going to take a lot of work to think this through carefully. And metals have a very, very important role to play, but the mining industry has a justly deserved poor reputation because everybody has to rethink everything from first principles. And it's very, very difficult. It takes decades to reinvent mining. The major mining companies are making very significant strides. They have young, responsible managers that want to change the way mining is done, but it's like turning around a super tanker. These are enormous companies with enormous amounts of capital involved. And this is not something that happens overnight. A lot of people want the energy transition to happen this decade, like now. we're just beginning to see how hard that really is. We are completely dependent on the existing infrastructure we have.
So more tangibly, looking at the EV industry and the car manufacturers, Tesla has had to raise car prices because of raw material price inflation. I think there's a lot of concern about pricing signals. But I think another concern that is becoming increasingly to the fore is concerns about quantity of raw materials and not having potentially enough raw materials available further down the line. So from your angle, when you're looking at sourcing strategies, what would you say would be a good strategy for a car manufacturer to make sure over the next 10, 15, 20 years they actually have access to the raw materials that they require to put the vehicles on the road that they want to?
And nobody can predict the future, but assuming reasonable stability through a recession and then a recovery, we're heading for a train wreck in the electrification of the automobile. Only 1 million out of 280 million cars in the United States are electric today. There's 279 million to go in the US alone. We've seen a huge increase in the price of the current generation of batteries, which tend to be nickel intensive, cobalt intensive, lithium intensive. And these prices of these raw materials are going up by hundreds of %. So the nickel crisis on the LME, we saw nickel go from 10,000 a ton to 100,000 a ton and stabilize at maybe 25 or 30,000, but there's no nickel in inventory. So nickel-based chemistries, all the automobile industry cannot get nickel-based chemistries 2 or 3 years from now. The metal simply doesn't exist. And so what happens is politicians mandate electric cars by such and such a date. The German automakers say, jawohl, Herr Kommandant, I will build the electrical cars. And they call their battery manufacturers, CATL, SK, LG, Sony, Panasonic, and they say we need 10 trillion batteries in 2024, 2025, as these new cars are supposed to come on stream. And the battery manufacturers say, sure, we'll be happy to take the order. Let's write down your order. What's your interest? And then the battery manufacturers call us and say, can you get us the metal? And the short answer is no. If there are 12 major automakers sitting around a table and they're playing a game of musical chairs, 2 or 3 may find the raw materials for nickel and cobalt intensive batteries. And we're seeing this already in a huge price increase, but we haven't even started the beginning of the first chapter of the electrification of these metals. And so we need better chemistry. We need chemistry for batteries which have commoner or more readily obtainable raw materials. So we've invested in a company based in Boston called Pure Lithium that came out of MIT that has a very high energy density battery with no nickel and no cobalt. It does need lithium metal. But there are new chemistries that have to be found because you can't have everybody with a nickel intensive battery. It just won't happen. There's a huge demand. Anybody that has a disruptive battery will win the game. And so there's intensive interest, not only from the car manufacturers, but consumer electronics also, because you have to store electrical energy somehow. And batteries are so fundamental to the energy transformation that there's an enormous amount of capital and interest in doing that. So there's always hope for better chemistries. But right now you have a massive investment in the current generation of chemistries. We're talking about the lithium-ion battery. There's hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars invested in this current generation of batteries. All that has to be thrown away when you get to a second battery chemistry that's fundamentally different. But the current generation of battery chemistries will not solve the problem for the automobile industry. And they're just starting to begin to understand the scale of the problem. It's like the fight between Elon Musk and Bill Gates. Elon Musk is complaining that Bill Gates is short Tesla. And Bill Gates says, well, you know, there's 10 or 12 other people that want to build electric cars. And so the competition is coming to the first mover. Tesla was brilliant. They gave a hot foot to all the conventional automakers and sped up the transition to electrification in the automobile industry by maybe 20 years or more. But now here comes the competition, and so the French companies are backed by the French, and the German companies are backed by the German, and the Japanese companies are backed by the Japanese government. And here again, we have international competition for the same raw materials played out at the level of the nation state. The Japanese are looking for raw materials for the Japanese car makers. The Koreans are looking for raw materials for the Korean car makers. We all know that the Chinese have at least a 20-year head start in the raw material supply chain for electrification. They were smarter. They were planning. They were thinking ahead of everybody else. And also individual national champions like Ford, General Motors, they're playing for the American team. And you're going to see this result in astronomically, beyond your wildest dreams, increases in demand for these relatively thinly traded metals. And these mines don't materialize overnight. They just don't.
Do you think, when we're talking about underinvesting in mining capacity, that would actually help if the car manufacturers took outright stakes in some of those operations on the mining level or on a corporate level?
It's unlikely, because automobile brands are risk adverse. If you have an electric car company and your car catches on fire, that's very bad for your brand. It goes out on the internet, this particular brand of car caught on fire. If that car is parked in the basement of a school and the school burns down, the manufacturer of that car has a huge, lethally damaging impact on their brand. So brand recognition is tied with being green, being responsible, all of the ESG characteristics that really applies to the brand in an automobile manufacturer. So an automobile manufacturer cannot wear the liability of a tailings dam collapsing, as happened to Vale, for example. If the automobile company owned the mine and the mine created an environmental problem, that would instantly be linked. So the car industry needs to find a way to reliably get metals, maybe as an off-taker, maybe as sort of some kind of financier of metals production combined with rigorous ESG characteristics. But they're going to need a buffer. I don't really think you'll see General Motors get in the mining business. When Henry Ford invented the mass production of automobiles in the 1920s, you remember it was any color you want as long as it was black. In 1927, the Model T. People were lined up to buy a Model T like being lined up to get the latest Apple phone. He didn't have to make pink or red Model Ts. They were black, and people were lined up to have an iron horse. He quickly found that he had to go to Minnesota and start mining iron to make his steel. He quickly learned he had to go to Brazil and grow rubber to make his tires. So in the early days, the car manufacturer, Henry Ford, actually did go upstream looking for his raw materials. Today, the car industry needs to find a way to be sort of a stimulator or an investor in metals production, but they probably need a bright line between their own ESG issues and the supply chain. However, it's a very important point, which is that the entire supply chain now gets audited. Every handphone is an NGO. Everything comes under scrutiny, and that just makes the whole thing more difficult. It makes it that much more trying. You have to, because that's why we talked about Saudi Arabia. If you go to Saudi Arabia and you find a mine, there's energy there. So the energy is already available, or there might be infrastructure there. The infrastructure is already available. The government is supportive of mining, and that means that all the bees will go there like they would go to honey. There's other places like the North Pole where it's difficult to go mining. There's no energy, there's no infrastructure. And so the definition of what is ore is rock you can mine at a profit, and I would add responsibly, is making it very, very difficult for us. And so as there's less places to go mining, it's like squeezing a grapefruit seed, the prices can only go up. And the input costs are going up, the energy costs are going up, the cost of getting no sriracha sauce, no baby food. So we're going to have a highly inflationary era. And if you raise my business costs by raising the interest rates, and I'm a producer, that doesn't produce any more metal. That just adds more cost. And so we're entering into a period where reality will be forced to intrude, and we'll have a more sober understanding of what will it take to really revolutionize and green our supply chain.
And just to round it off, coming back to some of your own operations in the portfolio, take Kamoa-Kakula. We spoke about that earlier on. It is delivering the biggest copper production increase globally right now. It has scope to grow further. Where do you think Kamoa-Kakula will ultimately max out in terms of production, and what would make you take the decision to actually increase output further from where we are at the moment?
Well, we won't go beyond what we've publicly disclosed. We've said that we think we're in a path to a little over 800,000 metric tons a year. On a run rate right now, this month, we're creeping up on 400,000 tons a year, debugging 450,000 next year. In 2024, north of 600,000. They're modules. At a run rate of 800,000 tons a year, we still have 75 or 100 years of mining. So one could add more concentrators and mine it more quickly at the expense of mine life. But you want to develop long-term communities and long-term involvement in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So we really want to be mining over 2 or 3 generations. Now, obviously, our R&D department is exploration. And when you look at the Democratic Republic of the Congo, you're clearly looking at one of the greatest mineral endowments in the world with a lot of fundamental advantages. There's no snow or ice. You're not climbing steep mountains. It's all fairly flat. And you have hydroelectric power. And that really becomes the limiting factor for us is we have to use hydroelectricity because it's available 24 hours a day. We can supplement with solar, but for baseline demand, to have a zero carbon production, you need that hydroelectricity. So we currently are developing enough hydroelectricity maybe to bump up on something on 800,000 tons plus smelting, or maybe 1 million tons without the smelting. And then we need a step change in hydroelectric power and more ore bodies. And so we have our hands full building the 3rd expansion and building a smelter. And this is really expanding very, very quickly. But I think if we just sort of let our eyeballs glaze, the Congo has a very bright future for more discoveries. And 1 million tons a year of copper would be, say, 5% of global production, order of magnitude. When you take off recycling, that's a lot. That's a lot. Now, can we get to 2 million or 3 million tons? It's certainly geologically permissible, but we need more hydroelectricity. The limiting factor always comes back to electricity. You need electricity to mine, to make the metals that you need to make electricity. It's a snake swallowing itself through its tail, right? The mouth of the tail is, the snake has its mouth open, it's swallowing its own tail. Without copper, we can't find the copper we need to grow any industry, and that includes automobiles. And so look at Europe. Can you name me the great copper mines in Europe? Just think about it for a minute. So the Europeans also want electric cars. Where are they going to buy this copper? Metals in inventory, as we're sitting here, are extremely low. In fact, last week, copper inventories were declining quite sharply. What happens when people start hoarding that metal? When they just say, oh, I'm going to store it in the basement because the price is going up. Or I'd rather own it than the United States dollar, for example, or against some other fiat currency. As you know, copper has been money in China for 5,000 years. Once you get commodity inflation, people start looking at commodities as being a form of money, right? They don't want to sell it, right? And once you add financial speculation on top of these commodity markets, prices can really go crazy.
And that actually takes me to a second operation in your portfolio, Platreef. Platinum obviously required in the hydrogen economy, for instance. Could you talk a little bit more about that operation?
Well, the beauty about Platreef is that you have a natural occurring hedged portfolio of metals in one mine. If you have only one metal in a mine, then you're completely hostage to the price of that one metal. But Platreef is platinum and palladium and gold and rhodium and nickel and copper. So it's like a hedged basket of metals in one deposit. And it's geologically enormous. It will go on for 100 years, maybe 200 years. And so the scale of it is only limited by how much capital is applied, how much electricity you have, and how much capital you want to invest. So right now, sitting here in 2022, no one has come up with a proton exchange membrane that appears to be viable without platinum metal. And so some people think we double platinum demand by, say, 2030, 2035, if we want to have a hydrogen economy. And in the meantime, rhodium, because of the transgressions of Volkswagen and Dieselgate, and palladium have gone crazy. Palladium is much more valuable than gold. And when it crossed gold, everybody thought there was a short-term phenomenon, but palladium has been more valuable than gold for a number of years now. So we're sort of agnostic as to which metal rises against which other metal in the portfolio, but when we average our 4 precious metals in that mine, the average is much more valuable than gold. In other words, 170 million ounces of precious metal is gold equivalent 210 million ounces or more. And so these are very valuable metals, and the nickel and the copper are fundamental for any form of energy transition. So I think it's the world's greatest ore body. It's the northern limb of the Bushveld, which itself was one of the greatest gifts of God. So, Saudi Arabia has an enormous hydrocarbon endowment. South Africa has an enormous endowment in platinum group metals. But those metals come with nickel and copper, which are critical for the endowment. And there's only 2 places in the world that have huge endowment in those metals, tier 1. That would be in Russia, around Norilsk, and in South Africa. So it's really apparent you have to go to where the metals are.
When I look at the pipeline further out, Kipushi is one of the projects that I think is very good.
Zinc is insanely important metal. Apart from the fact that your mother gives it to you when you get the flu, it's one of the good metals that's good for you. But we've now learned that zinc is a super powerful fertilizer for agricultural development. It turns out that most of the soils in India and China are depleted in zinc from centuries of farming. And it turns out when you add a little bit of zinc oxide to plants, you get an explosion in growth. So think of zinc as a fertilizer like phosphate or potash. And this is a disruptive new use for zinc because when zinc is used in metals, some of that metal is recycled. But when metals are used as a fertilizer, they're not recycled. They're put on the earth and they stay there. So the new incremental demand for zinc as a fertilizer, and all Chinese fertilizers are now adding zinc to DAP, for example, for fertilizers, is huge new disruptive demand for zinc. In addition, a lot of the old zinc mines in China were a source of cadmium pollution. So the government, in limiting pollution in China, has responsibly closed a lot of the polluting zinc mines. And of course, nobody invested in zinc the last 20 or 30 years. So now we see incredible fundamentals. The price has doubled. It could easily double again. Now when you build solar fields, all those solar panels, if you make those solar panels with mild steel, they rust. So it's all galvanized. And so just in construction, we're seeing zinc roofing becoming very popular, for example. A zinc roof is very good on your house. It doesn't rust. So all fundamental infrastructure as you rebuild it is demanding zinc. And as you know, the highways and the bridges in America are kaput. They're old, they're tired. So there's enormous demand coming for zinc, and there's been almost no investment in zinc production. This is the revenge of the old economy, that we have a molecule crisis, that zinc is in shortage, or germanium is in shortage, or copper is in shortage, or nickel or cobalt or rare earths. The list is endless because we've had 30 or 40 years where all the money went into broadband or internet or Netflix or the cloud, and no money went into basic productive capacity of metals. And now that we're balkanizing the world economy, these metals represent a kind of money. Their price is rising against the United States dollar. So their price is rising against paper currencies. And so it's not crazy for you to buy an ETF composed of a basket of metals as a currency, as a way of preserving your wealth. And once speculative demand comes on top of national security demand, that's when you can see metals go up 30-fold. We've seen molybdenum go from $1 a pound to $30 a pound. We haven't seen gold go from $1,500 to $60,000, $80,000 an ounce. It might happen. You know, as if people lose faith in paper currencies and fiat currencies. But we have a situation where even the precious metals may come under great demand because the American dollar is rallying because the Fed is raising rates. At a certain point, they reach the pain point. Say, for example, the Donald takes the House and Senate in November. Maybe that's the end of U.S. rates going up because the Donald starts screaming, I don't want any more interest rate rises. At that point, the dollar is kaput. Take a look at the Japanese yen. It's just gone from 100 yen to the dollar to 132 yen to the dollar. Now imagine what the price of zinc looks like in Japanese yen. The zinc price is going straight up in Japan. Price of copper is going through the roof in Japan because these commodities are priced in dollars. And so I think a lot of your institutional investors don't realize how many of these balkanized economies are in a panic. The Japanese wanted to create some inflation in their economy. Now they're going to have more inflation than they know what to do with. The price of everything they need. Look at the island of Japan, totally vulnerable. They have to import all their metals, all their hydrocarbon, all their coal, don't they? It's imported. It's all priced in dollars. So there's going to be an explosion of inflation in Japan. And they manufacture things that we buy, like a Toyota. So the price is going up. They can't escape being part of the supply chain. So the more you think about what we're talking about, it takes a while. It takes a while for people in the financial world. You really need to slow down and think about what we're saying here. We're in an era where the old economy is exacting its revenge. You know, I've been accused of calling it the revenge of the miners. It's not just the miners, it's the revenge of the underfinanced old economy. Combined with national security constraints, we face a rocky future, and we have a lot of work to do if we're going to leave our kids a better world. Simple.